If you open your waveform and you play with the exposure, you'll visually see what I'm desperately trying to say.
All right, welcome back to the latest episode of Game Day Glare. I'm Lance. I'm with E. This is the podcast for sports videographers. How you doing, E?
Good. Trying to get back to, last time we spoke, I was just back from vacation. So still working on bringing back the discipline and the structure to my work week. Still a work in progress, but at least the days are longer now. The sun stays up a little longer, so it brings more. The end of the day is not as hard as it used to be. So definitely looking forward to spring. But it does feel like one day the snow totally disappears, and then the next day it fully comes back. It's a very frustrating time of year for me anyway. Looking out the window is always there's a happy day and then there's a sad day sort of thing. But what about you?
So let me just put that in context for our viewers and listeners who do not understand what it's like to live in Montreal. It was 15 degrees Celsius yesterday, and then it went to minus 15 the next day. Yeah. And right now, outside my window, there's a snowstorm. And we are fed up with snow because this started November 11th, and we're at the end of March now. And we're tired of it. So that's what E's perspective is. Me, I'm kind of like you, E. I'm slowly getting back in my rhythm. Being away for 2 weeks, doing some work, having some days off, all this stuff, doing a lot of catch up with some clients. And I also, when I was away, I filmed a couple personal projects. So I was flying my drone at sunrise, sunset, any free time I had. I got some really nice shots that I wanted to do. And now it's the dreaded, the folder is full of footage and it's just sitting on my desktop. And it's like, when am I going to get to this? Because I have no time for my personal projects. I'm too busy on client stuff and with our podcast and that. And that's a struggle that I always have is I go on vacation. I have the best intentions to make the most of it. Mm-hmm. And I never really do. So with you and your YouTube and that, how do you maybe you can give me some tips. How do you actually get that personal shit done?
Yeah, well, I'm not an expert at it either. But,
you're all I got. You're all I got. So help me out.
Yeah, well, I think it's about blocking. It's the same thing with going on vacation. You just, as a freelancer, it's always a tricky thing because, how much work do I want to cancel? Do I want to say no to so that I can go spend more money? It sounds like a very expensive, thing. And working on your personal stuff is the same thing. If you put work aside to work on personal stuff, you feel like you're spending money doing this because you're not working on the stuff that is making you money. So it's always a difficult choice. But I think that if you set a day and you stick to it, then it's just, you're going to be able to build your schedule around it and it's not going to really make a difference. So depending on the size of the work that you have on your shoulders, whether it's once a week or once a month or every 2 weeks, whatever. But if you know that the first day of the month, for example, is a personal day, or the first day of the week is a personal day, and you're always just going to organically build your shoots and everything else around that, and that way you don't really miss out on anything. But yeah, you have to commit and just make it part of your life, which is still a work in progress for me, by the way.
Because vacation Lance could wake up at sunrise and go fly his drone and get all these cool locations of a town he's visiting. But everyday Lance would never do that for his hometown.
Yeah.
It's
exactly.
Maybe I should start doing that for my hometown and do some of these cool shots and fly my drone and get the establishing shots of my own town instead of just letting Vacation Lance do it. Yeah. But Vacation Lance has a lot better time doing it because today I would be outside in a winter toque and hat and gloves. It's a lot easier to wake up at 7 for sunrise when you're in shorts and flip-flops, But still, it is something that I want to work on and I want to do. Now, today's episode, I want to actually go over. So you just came out with a really good YouTube video, and I was looking at it, and I said, you know what? Maybe it's something we could talk about with our viewers and that. And you were talking about how to fix your sports footage, because a lot of people out there have these great cameras, like you and I, and they expect to get the same results that we would get. But the thing is, there's a couple things that are probably missing that is hurting their footage. And I thought you did a really good job. You guys, if you want, check out Yi's YouTube on Beyond the Game. He goes into it too, but today we'll go in a little more depth because we have a little bit more time, a 10-minute YouTube video or a 45-minute discussion between best friends talking about what we love to do. So I would just basically was lazy today and I stole Yi's idea, and we're going to talk about how to fix your sports footage. So Yi, what is the number one question that you're getting on your YouTube channel or issue that people are having with their footage?
Well, there's a lot of that. Like, it's because often, whether it's a great camera or a basic one, like, first of all, people are not too sure where to start to get the best results out of the camera, because they don't really understand. Like, there's some settings that are obvious, but there are others that aren't. And so understanding what everything does. And it's, it's always that thing where they want to get better footage, but they don't necessarily want to become experts at filming. It's a hobby. It's something that they do to film their kids or to whatever. So it's not like something that they necessarily wanted to take over their free time. So it's that balance of like, how much do I really want to learn about this? But at the same time, I really want some great footage. And it's like, so it's always that kind of, how far do I want to go into this? So my point was that, yeah, like if you do get like a camera that has like that can produce like a certain quality of work, like, cause a lot of time it starts from seeing other people's content on Instagram, and then you really like that look, and then you buy the same equipment, but you feel like you're not really getting the same look, even though you're using the same gear. So you're like, what am I doing wrong? So the idea of the video and the conversation today is to talk about a few little things that if you pay a bit more attention to, that's the difference between your footage and the other person's footage that looks like better than yours or sharper than yours, or just like, has a little something that yours doesn't. Like, it's just like little tweaks here and there that altogether, like nothing by itself is complicated, is just little things that you need to do, and by the end of it you get to like a very professional finish.
When I was watching your video, it reminded me of when I started out. We used to use HDV cams or Sony EX series, right? Mm-hmm. And there used to be the low, medium, high when you were in dark. Your DVs,
brightness,
you put it up. And I just click at to the high, and you look on your screen, and it will look great. And you're like, oh, this is perfect. I'm exposed properly. And then you put that card or tape in your machine, and you look and you see all the grain, and you're like, why is my footage crap? It looks so good. And this is exactly what happens all the time, right? Is people don't understand which setting they're not getting properly. If you're underexposed, or if your ISO is too high and you're adding in too much grain. And sometimes when you look in your monitor, it looks okay. But it's when you put it on the computer and when you put it on a bigger format screen, that's where you really, really see the imperfections. And that's the whole idea, is to help you guys not get through those mistakes and share some of the mistakes that we made. So I remember at Oshiaga one year, I'm filming outside, and then I'm filming in a trailer, and then I go back outside and I left it on high, and my footage is all scrapped and overexposed and bad. But I can't even really see it because the sun is beating down on my monitor, and you can't really see much. So I had to fix so much in post. I had to give it this special look to kind of make it look like it was grungy on purpose. So there are workarounds, but the idea is, shoot it properly the first time, and it gives you so much more freedom. And especially with the mirrorless cameras we have today, they're so sharp, they're so accurate. The footage, when you are properly exposed or in the right settings, wow. And like you made a good point too. What you see on Instagram too inspires you, and you see some really good stuff. You can accomplish that too.
No, exactly. So where do we start? What's the first thing that people should focus on, you think?
So I think the first thing is obviously your camera settings, right?
Yeah.
And you have to understand that you don't just need to go out and buy a mirrorless camera. You can achieve some really good stuff with action cams, your iPhone, everything. Any camera you have, you can produce good quality. But I think the first thing is, even before we get into settings, is what are you filming at? Are you filming in 4K? Are you filming in 1080? I think your resolution is where you kind of got to start and figure out, what can you record at to get the highest resolution, even though your social media is most likely like it's getting compressed. It's going at 1080 anyway. I still want to film at the highest possible resolution and bitrate as I can. What would you say?
Yeah. No, I agree. I think resolution. I'll definitely go for 4K if I can. Just because more pixel gives you better look in the details and in the movement, and sports has a lot of details, a lot of moving parts, a lot of changes. It's not like it's a plain image of an interview, for example, where the background is pretty plain and not moving at all. So in a context like that, having a high resolution and a high bit rate is definitely gonna be helpful. And a high bit rate also is going to help for situations like the outdoor sports, like the sky. If you film at a low bit rate, it won't be like a blue gradient. It'll be like you'll see like literally like layers sometimes. It'll be like a darker blue and then a mid and then a wider sort of thing, and it won't be as smooth, that transition, because there's just not enough data in your in per pixel to try to compute all those different shades of blue. Basically, I'm doing a poor job of explaining it because I'm not a tech head. But yeah, if you have more data, basically, there's you can analyze like billions of colors. Where if you've got less, then there's less colors available, less shades of colors available, and that's where you can see a separation in the blue sky that has like all these variations in a natural just setting. So anyway, all that to say that like a higher bit rate, like I think most people get like a higher resolution, the image is bigger, and even if they don't get that, they know that 4K is better than 1080p in 2026. I think even my mom knows that. But bit rate is one of those things where people don't really understand what it does, and they don't really see a difference when looking at it on the screen. But what they do know is that they tried once maybe the highest bit rate, and then the files got like twice the size. So they were like, F that. Like, I'm just going back to the normal thing. Or sometimes it's just like if you go to a higher bit rate, like if it's a really high bit rate, 10-bit and all that, sometimes your computer is struggling, or you can't open, the files don't open in QuickTime anymore. So you have to open them in Premiere or in something like specific, like a VLC. And then it changes your whole method of just like watching your clips. So you don't like that. So for those reasons, and let's not, forget the fact that hard drives are pretty expensive these days. Like, so for those reasons, like people will just go for a lower bit rate because they don't really see the value in the higher bit rate. And at the end of the day, like is it absolutely necessary to always film at the highest bit rate? Probably not. But if you want something that is not, it's a one thing set and forget sort of thing. So if there's one thing that's easy for you to do and that's going to allow you to get like a higher quality, it's that one. So, and by easy, I mean easy in terms of like what you have to do, but obviously it's going to end up in the long end being more expensive because your files are bigger, you need more data, more space, things like that. But it is something that's going to make a difference, but the difference is subtle. Like it's going to allow you, when it comes down to the whole thing I described previously about the sky and other similar situations, but also if you want to adjust the colors and things like that in post-production, by having a higher bit rate, it will allow you that all that extra data will allow you to play with the highlights, play with the shadows, all these things, and do what you're actually trying to do. Where if you have a lower bit rate and there's not a lot of data, if you try to push the exposure up or the shadows up, things like that, that's when a lot of extra like grain is going to come out of nowhere that wasn't there previously. But now that you're trying to play with this, like it all falls apart. And that's why like filming in S-Log with like a budget camera with a low bit rate, that's very hard to sort of grade because there's not a lot of room for error. Like you really need to get your exposure right in camera. But so a high bit rate can definitely be helpful, but it's something that it doesn't, like, a lot of people don't think about it because you don't see it. It's not obvious. That was a long answer.
It's okay. It's okay. So look, I'll just summarize it up, right? The higher the bit rate, the more information you have, the more flexibility you can get. Because a lot of times when you look in camera, it looks great. But when you put it on your screen, that's when you're going to notice it. That's where the extra bit rate really comes in handy. But yes, it comes at a price because it is heavier files. And it's funny you mentioned hard drives. I just bought 2 new hard drives recently. And I was like, what the hell happened to hard drives? Like, the same hard drive I was going to buy in January is now like $150 more for the exact same thing. And I'm like, what's going on with hard drives? But anyway, that's a whole other thing. You want the higher bit rate so you have more information to be able to push your footage. Now, there is one issue that I had in the past with bit rate, and it was due to I was using someone else's camera. And I'm filming, and on mine, I have everything set up. And I didn't realize when I was changing frame rates, they had different bit rates on their frame rates. And now this is something that can really mess up your footage. So if you're in 10 bit and you're in 24 frames per second, and then when you put in, say, 60 frames a second and you're in 8 bit and you don't realize that. So that is a common mistake that people do. They don't always realize that their different modes could have different bit rates. So that's something that you do want to make sure, and you want to double check, because that will affect your footage.
Yeah, exactly. I think at the first time you go to like 60, I think once you've set every frame rate to the highest bit rate, after that you can switch on a Sony camera anyway. Like, you can switch and it's going to stick to that highest bit rate that you picked. But the first time that you go, like, by default, it's going to be at 8 bits. So if you go to 60p and you didn't adjust 60p previously, yeah, it's always good to double check, and especially if you did like an update on your camera recently or things like that. So yeah, you should definitely double check when you change your frame rate and make sure that the bit rate is what it was, or what you want it to be. Sorry.
8 bit used to be the norm. And then when they came out with 10 bit, I was a bit skeptical at first. I'm like, I don't really need 10 bit. I have S-Log2 at the time, and then it goes to S-Log3. But when you go back and you look at an 8 bit file to a 10 bit file, there is a huge difference. There really is. And it's something that you take for granted. So if your phone, your camera can do it, trust me, it is well worth it. Your footage will be clearer, will be easier to work with. It will make your workflow easier. And yes, it comes at a price of maybe higher files, but it's not like a crazy double the amount or anything like that. So it is definitely worth to push that higher bitrate if your camera can.
Yeah. And if you want to see, like, because if you do like color correction, like if you have your waveform open, you'll see like a 10-bit file, let's say, like, it does a kind of a shape like that. And like, if I try to push my exposure, everything's going to move up. It's going to spread itself, like, whatever direction I go, darker or brighter, like it follows. If you have an 8-bit file, as you stretch your signal, you'll see like it almost looks like horizontal blinds. Like, there'll be like lines of it's like there's not enough data, so when you stretch it, like, there's nothing hidden in there like to sort of fill those gaps that you just created. So
it's like pulling pizza dough, and you can see through
it. Exactly. So if you have like a 10-bit pizza dough, it would stretch perfectly, but like the 8-bit has holes in it, basically. So if you open your waveform and you play with the exposure, you'll visually see what I'm desperately trying to say.
All right. Well, I'm going to let you get this one. And next one, let's start talking about ISO, E.
Yes.
All right. So you kind of blew my mind last episode when you're like, or on the A7 V episode when you're like, Sony says there really is no second base ISO, but there is 2 base ISOs that we use. So why don't we talk about how important it is to actually get the right base ISO and how to kind of work that exposure triangle?
Yeah. Well, the idea, like, a lot of people, when they look at their footage and say, like, I feel like my footage is not quite there compared to others, most of the time noise is involved. So it's a noisy mess, and it might not be a crazy noisy, but just the fact that it is a little bit without even seeing the actual noise, the impact that it has is that it makes your image look a little bit flatter. It's not as sharp. It just makes it look like, if you compare it to like a video that doesn't have any noise, like it just looks sharper. The colors look more vivid and more like everything looks just a little bit more. So having the luxury of filming at a base ISO and there's zero noise, and the dynamic range also is at its best, which means that you'll have more details, more sharpness in your shadows and in your highlights and things like that. That's another thing that is subtle but makes a big difference at the end when it's all said and done. So the base ISO, like I said, is the ISO level where there's no noise and best dynamic range on the camera. That value changes on every camera, and it also changes depending on the picture profile that you're using. Like I said in my video, usually on Sony cameras, like the minimum values, ISO values will have like horizontal bars at the top and bottom. And then the first one, as you go up, eventually there'll be one, and then all the other ones above that won't have those bars. So the first one that doesn't have the horizontal bars is the base ISO. So typically you want to choose your picture profile first, and then once you've chosen the picture profile, then you find your base ISO and you try to work around that to get the proper exposure. So how can I get the proper exposure? By keeping my ISO ideally to the base ISO. If not, because if you're in a low light situation, as close as possible. So if it means having a slower shutter speed, if it means like having an aperture that's pretty open, things like that to help you manage the ISO, that's how you're going to get your cleanest image. So that's what I try to do. Obviously with my camera, I've got an FX3, so I've got the luxury of having an actual dual base ISO camera, so I can film at 12,800 and get everything I just talked about. So that definitely helps me a lot. But on other cameras, you do get like a noise reset at a second value. So that's, you don't get as much dynamic range, but it's still like a great thing to have. It's very helpful. So usually in low light situations, you'll go to that second one, and that second one doesn't have it's not like the bars like restart, so you need to Google it to know exactly what it is, or just test it, like film in a low lit environment and just go up, and at some point you'll see that by going up it went cleaner. So that's what your second base ISO is, but typically you can just Google it. But yeah, you need to set your picture profile, then set your ISO. And then after that, try to use the shutter speed and the aperture to get the proper exposure. That's how you get your cleanest image.
Now, I like having a base ISO. I feel like it takes a lot of the thinking out of it for me. So when you're filming S-Log, right? S-Log 3 on a Sony camera, your base ISO is 800. If you're filming with no picture profile, you don't really have a base ISO. I mean, you're supposed to stay in a certain range, but you can kind of try what you want. So when you're doing an exposure triangle, I feel like it's one less step I have to do. If I know my ISOs when I'm shooting S-Log 3 are 800 or 12,800, it's one less thing to guess for me. And I think you have to use that to your advantage. Now, I have a question for you, E. When do you decide, I'm going to go to that second ISO? So if you're filming in a gym and you're at 800 and you're opened the whole way and you're filming 24, say you're at your meters at like 1.7, or 1 point, say you're 1, and you're a little underexposed. But if you go to 12,800 now, you're really going to be pushing it. You're going to be overexposed. But when do you make that judgment? Like, okay, and what are you doing to get your footage where you are? I know there's a couple little add-ons that we could do to that, but like I want to see, when are you saying like, okay, you know what, I'm ready. Like I'm pretty close to proper exposure now, but I rather have complete control. I'm going to jump to the second dual ISO. When do you make that jump, that decision? Because it's not an easy one to always make. There's times where I've shot a little under and I'm like, I'm good enough, I'll push it in post. But maybe I shouldn't be so lazy, and maybe I should just jump to that dual ISO and take complete control right away.
Yeah, well, it depends on the camera, because like, it goes back to that bitrate conversation. If you're filming in 10 bit, you have the luxury of doing exactly what you just said. Like you can say, if I'm a little bit underexposed, not that big of a deal. I can color correct it in post and it'll be fine, which it probably will. If we're talking less than like 2 stops, ideally less than 1 stop, but I think you can go up until like 2 stops in post without like destroying a 10-bit image. But yeah, for me, it's like I was probably a bit too like self-conscious with the base ISOs earlier on. Like as soon as, like you said, I would go towards the 1 or a bit less than 1 on the metering, I would automatically go to like 12,800, and if it would mean like going way too high with the aperture and stuff, I would just put on a VND, even though I'm indoors, just to make up for the extra brightness. These days, like if all I need to do to make it properly exposed is to go like 1 step or 2, like for example, if my base ISO is 800, if all I need to do is go to like 1,000 or the next one, which I think is 1,200 or something like that, I'll just do that. Like I'm not as like, it needs to be clean all the time. Like, I'm a bit more easygoing with that stuff, because I realize that a lot of people don't film at the base ISO, and it's not, like I said, like noise. If you go like way up, like I've seen like someone recently who I mentor, like showed me their footage. They're like, I feel like it's a bit flat. And then I opening it in Catalyst Browse, like you can see every setting. And they were filming at like 6,400. And I was like, yeah, well, that's, you're kind of getting into the, if you have to go all the way up to 6,000 something, I would say, well, first of all, your shutter speed is like at 1 over like 500, or I think it was, or 640. So like you could potentially just take the shutter speed down a notch so that you can take the ISO down a notch as well.
Yeah, that's a high shutter speed. That's high.
Yeah, exactly. So, or like if you're gonna be in the 6,000s anyway, go to 12,000. And yeah, manage whether it's with a VND or just playing with your aperture, your shutter speed, whatever. But like, I think like if you're over the like 2,000-3,000 ISO, I would tend to want to go to my second base ISO, and not just like when you're in the thousands, plural. I'd like to go to the second base ISO, basically, to answer your question.
Okay. It's funny you mentioned filters, right? So ND filters and that. And I think that's something people struggle with when they're filming outside. Because when I started shooting an S-Log, right, ISO 800, when you're filming outside, is way, way, way too bright. And I have the Polar Pro, so Peter McKinnon 2-stop to 5-stop. Mm-hmm. And there's days where that's not even enough. Like you need that 6 to 9 depending on a bright day, but I'm too cheap to buy the 6 to 9 because I hardly ever use it. So I just cheat and I crank my shutter. I use that to 5. I change my aperture a little bit, but that's what I do when I'm outside. And mm-hmm. it's tricky when you first start doing stuff outside with that base ISO at 800 because you just want to lower it. You want to lower it. It's going to solve a lot of issues. But you do see the difference when you lower it outside. Like at least I have in the past. And I don't like it, so I stick to that 800. But that's something that it's a challenge. It's a challenge. When you're, say 80% of sports you're filming inside, you're okay. If you're doing basketball, well, at least for me, basketball, hockey, stuff like that, I'm inside, so I'm not really worried about it. But outside stuff is challenging, especially if you don't have that 6 to 9 stop ND filter.
And the good thing about using a VND inside is like outdoors, often you have to play with it. Like you're always adjusting because there's clouds and things like that are changing the lighting constantly. Inside, it's set and forget sort of thing. Like it's, like if you go to like a higher ISO to get the second base ISO, but then put like a VND. You set it to like 2 probably or something like that, and then that's it. Like you don't have to. It's like it's not even there. So it's an easy. It's not really an extra step. Like it's just another thing that you put on your camera, and that's it. So it's pretty easy to manage.
What do you think the biggest mistake beginners are making with when it comes to ISO?
Well, I think it's the same thing with ISO and a few other things. Is that a lot of people, like beginners specifically, and parents, a lot of the times, is they want like a set and forget type of thing. Like they want a recipe, a setting recipe that they can put in, and that's it. And now they're showing up to every event and it's ready to go. And there's certain things like your exposure, your colors, you're going to have to adjust every time. Like colors, if you're going to the same venue every time, you're probably going to be fine. But other than that, yeah, it's something that like I don't have an answer for you. Like, and when you're asking me like, what should I use, or they ask me, what are you using? Like, what? Like someone asked me the other day, like, what white balance were you using with that camera, that thing? I'm like, I told them, but at the same time, I was like, just to be clear, like that, the color temperature has nothing to do with the camera. It would look the same on any camera. It's more about the environment. Like, so it's that I think is the biggest mistake, is that people assume that a setting is more related to the camera than to the environment. So they just want, what's the recipe for my camera to be good? And the recipe has less to do with your camera than it has to do with your environment. So every environment is different, no matter what camera you're using. So there's always settings that you're going to have to adjust on the day. That's it. That's probably the biggest mistake or misconception.
Two things. So yeah, someone asking you what your white balance is there, it's only important if they're going back to that same venue. Yeah. Your white balance is not controlling anything. I can give you my white balance right now, and you could go outside and use the same white balance, and it's not going to be the right white balance. So that's number one. Yeah. And number two, that you opened up someone's footage and Catalyst browse and saw their settings. Like that's pretty good. Cause you're like, you see the mistakes right there. Cause Catalyst browse will just show you exactly what they shot. And right away, if your shutter is that high, you're like, you're darkening your own image right away. So you don't need to be at 6,400. You could probably do it at 800. Or you tell them if you're going to go all the way to 6,400, well, you might as well go to 12,800 and then control the following. Exactly. But that's pretty smart to just look at it in Catalyst browse. I'd be scared though. Yeah, for sure. But imagine sending your mentor that.
Yeah, well, that's cool because like he just sends me like the folder of like everything he shot that day, and I can kind of go through the clips. So it's very convenient. It's easy to instead of like asking, where were you shooting? And then, I don't remember, it was last week, whatever. Like Catalyst browse is pretty convenient for that. But there is like a caveat, which is because I was always wondering, like, if I'm like, sometimes you're changing your ISO while filming. So I'm pretty sure that Catalyst browse will only give me the value of when they pressed record. If something changed after that, there's no way for me to know.
But honestly, you shouldn't be changing it during a clip. Like, stop the record, fix it on the clip, next clip.
Yeah. But like with the ISO, sometimes if they're, especially outdoors, like you might be playing with it a little bit. So there's no, like, I know that he started at this, but maybe he went down at some point. Like, but if I see like multiple clips have the same ISO, I know that that's pretty, I got my answer.
So to our listeners, if you hire E to mentor you, he's going to be checking your footage. He's going to be saying, this is where your problem is. Look at what my Catalyst browse is telling me.
I'm a private investigator of sports videography.
That's it. So next up is exposure, right? You cannot be lazy in camera with your exposure. And let me just like clear the air here. The metering in your camera at 0, that is supposed to be the gray. On the gray scale, that is supposed to be the perfect gray. But that is not always 100% accurate with what's going on. It's looking for gray. Your camera actually sees in black and white. So that's why that metering is there. So if you're taking photos in that and you're usually going with that metering all the time, you probably could be underexposed a lot. And that's why with S-Log, they want you to push it to 1.7 because they want that gray up, okay? So there are tricks to get your exposure properly, but the best thing that I use is, you have a LUT imported in your camera, And I'll use my zebras. If I'm not sure, I'll use my zebras. And you will have some parts that are a bit blown out. But the reason why those parts are blown up, it's because it's the actual light. The actual light source will be blown out. You will get the zebras on it. But don't worry about that. Focus on your subject. Focus on the jersey. Focus on whatever it is that you want to see properly in your image.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people get that whole wrong.
Yeah. No, yeah. Because like for me, and like you said, like it's having it right in camera is going to save you, because if you have it right on camera, means you've got less work to do in post, and the less work you do in post, the better your image is gonna look, because you're not transforming it as much. Like, so that's the main reason, like ultimately for like the topic of today is like, hey, getting the highest quality, like by getting the exposure right, you're putting your best foot forward for everything that happens next. But yeah, I was gonna say like that to expose like my image right now, like on my FX30 that's filming me, like the meter is saying +1, but I don't think +1 is coming from me. I think +1 is coming from that light coming through the door on the left, and from those lights on the wall on the right. Like that's probably what's creating that. So like so yeah, you have to be smart about it and realize that sometimes the numbers don't tell the full story. And like you said, the priority is the subject. So if you got dark skin subject, you might have to expose a bit more if you want to see details in the face. If your team is playing with a white uniform, you might have to tone it down a bit, because you're going to lose a lot of details on the uniform. So yeah, you have to trust yourself, like use the camera and the tools that are there, but also like use a field monitor and learn how to appreciate what you're seeing, and trust your gut in terms of like, I know that this is blown out. I know that the tools are telling me that the sky is blown out, but right now my player looks great, and that's what matters.
You know when I notice it is on media day. So when I'm doing a bunch of talking head stuff like this, so for you and I, for instance, I'm wearing black, you're wearing white. We can walk into the exact same booth with the exact same exposure, and my camera will read it differently just because of our shirts. And I'm not worried about what they're wearing. I'm worried about their skin tone. I'm worrying about how they are looking. And it is hard to not always trust your camera, but you have to sometimes just go with your eye, go with your gut, and go with what you think is working. Now, I have a question for you, E. What is worse, bad exposure or bad white balance?
I'd say bad white balance, in the sense like it depends. Like if it's just a bit too yellow, a bit too blue, like, something that can be fixed just by adjusting like the basic colors, it's probably bad exposure. But when it's a matter of like, you need to color correct your shadows a certain way and your highlights a different way and blah, blah, blah. For me, I'd rather adjust my exposure than play with the colors of each level of exposure. Like, because obviously it all depends on how bad you're underexposed or overexposed. But if it's just the fine tuning, like I can get the exposure right. I never feel like I get the colors right. You know what I mean?
Oh, see, I'm the exact opposite. I would rather get an off-white balance, but have the exposure as close to perfect as possible. So I was kind of shocked that you said that, because
well, in terms of image quality, you're definitely right.
Yeah.
It's just for me, like I'm so not confident in my skills in color correction that if it is a complex type of situation with colors, I'd much rather deal with the exposure than deal with that.
So perfect. Send me one of your clips. I'm going to open in Catalyst Browse, and I'm going to make it destroy your confidence right now. Okay, bud? All right. Next up is white balance. Okay. And I feel like it is tricky, man. White balance is tough, especially when you have different light sources or the lights changing. Stuff like that. What I try to do is when I'm doing a shoot, I decide on a white balance. There are tools, you can get apps, you could, look at your lights, if you're setting your own lights, like in this controlled environment, my lights are at 56K, my camera's at 56K. I know I'm pretty good. I suggest though, if for some reason your white balance is changing that, you can kind of just keep, once you press record or start that shoot, try and keep it very similar. So then when you have color corrections, you can kind of keep it on pace with every other clip. But what tricks are you using, E, for white balance? I know you're pretty good. You walk in, you look at the lights, you're like, okay, they're fluorescent. It's 4200. Like the Bell Center is 56K. Their lights are daylight. Like, you know, and your cameras have some pretty good stuff. Like if you go outside and you use the outside white balance, 9 out of 10 times, you're perfect. A lot of pro photographers I know, they shoot on auto white balance, which for me is like, what the hell are you doing? But in still photography, it holds a little bit longer. It doesn't change as much, and they have so much flexibility. Anyway, so what are your tips and tricks for nailing the perfect white balance? Because I need them. I need them.
Yeah, me too. but yeah, I think you're right. First of all, like photography and video are very different from that perspective, because it's not like you're watching photos. Like it doesn't really matter if your photos, well, you obviously want to get the skin tones and everything right, but it doesn't really matter if one photo is slightly different than another in terms of color, as long as they both look good. Where in video, you can't have your colors kind of fluctuate through the video. So it's not that same pressure of trying to keep everything consistent. But yeah, with that pressure comes hard decisions, and yeah, you have to sort of pick one is my recommendation. Like auto white balance for me is more for situations that are constantly changing and you don't have the time to adjust. So whether it's going from one room to another, like run and gun, to like a documentary situation, things like that. But other than that, I always suggest like picking one, even if it means like maybe at halftime you switch because, you know, it's a sunset situation. But yeah, I think it's, for me, like outdoors, I'll always go with daylight. It's, the struggle is when it is exactly that. The sun's going down and then the stadium lights are taking over. There's a transition there that you're going from one color temperature to a completely different one. So when do you make the switch? When do you adjust? It's a tricky thing. Like I tried everything. Like I've definitely regretted keeping the same one the whole way through, because the second half was just disgusting. But at least change, like I'm talking about a game that starts like at 7:30 in the summer. So like the sun fully goes down at what, like 9, something like that. So like all your pre-game stuff is like bright sunny day, and then as soon as the game starts, it starts getting darker and darker, and then the lights take over. So yeah, it's one of these things, like you could do it per quarter, you could do it at halftime, like to each their own. But yeah, you definitely need to set something. In terms of the colors, at that point, it really depends on the stadium and the lights that they're using. So I would recommend doing a white balance, kind of, you know, pointing it at something, a gray card or a white piece of something. And if you're going back to that venue enough, at one point you'll know what it is, and you'll just put it in, you know, automatically, just manually yourself, which is what I do at basketball venues. Like indoors, like it's pretty easy for me at this point. Like you know, there's probably 2 or 3 venues that I go to like regularly. So, and usually fluorescent lights like that, like they're always somewhere between 43 and 4900 Kelvin. So I'm usually around 43, but yeah, it's always somewhere in that range. So it's pretty easy once you've been to the same place multiple times. You know, like the one time that you nail it and you're looking at your footage in the computer and oh yeah, that the colors look good this time for once. So again, open Catalyst browse, look at what color temperature I used, and remember it for next time. So that's you know, Catalyst browse is free, by the way, people. So make the most of it. But
this episode is not sponsored by Catalyst browse.
By Sony. Yeah, no. But yeah, so it's about like making sure that you the first time you try to get it right, and then after that you can just, you know, enter it manually.
Auto white balance is good until it's not good. And the reason why I say that is you could use auto white balance if you're really stuck. And then I suggest locking it in. Or then you go in, change, and you get something as close to that auto white balance as you can and leave it locked in. Or you can add, I have a function on my A7 IV where I can lock the auto white balance. Because the main issue for having bad footage with auto white balance is you can be filming white jersey and it turns to a yellow tint depending on where you're filming or as the light's changing and stuff like that. And that's a lot harder to work with than just being locked in on one color on that clip. So you can use auto white balance if you need, but just be aware that it's auto. It's going to change when it wants to change, and that will definitely make your footage not look as good. All right. So use it with caution, but it's a good starting point. If you walk into a room and you really have no idea what the light temperature is, then use your auto white balance, get it to where you want your skin tones, and then you can manually, go in and try and find something as close to as possible as what you just seen. Because you will remember what it was at, you will remember what it looks like, and you just go from there. And then, lock it in and keep it. Because it's happened to me in the past where, if you're renting cameras and stuff and you forget, you leave one on auto white balance and you're not thinking because you're in a rush, and then you see the footage and you see it kind of shift. And once you have that shift, you're kind of screwed, because then you're stuck editing, color correcting different parts of that segment, and they're not all perfect. And it's really, really tricky. Next up, we talked already about ND filters and stuff like that. I want to talk about the importance of shutter speed. So you have the 180-degree rule. And basically it is, if you're shooting at, 24 frames per second, well, you want your shutter speed at 50. If you're shooting at 60, you want like 120, and so on. So do you think that that's probably the easiest hack, is if you're overexposed, something like that, is to, what would you prefer, adjusting your shutter or adjusting your aperture? Because your ISO is already locked in, obviously, if you're shooting at S-Log3.
Yeah, well, usually like if I've got the ISO that I want and I'm overexposed, like the aperture, I like to sort of prioritize it from a creativity perspective. Like if, for example, well, not creativity, but like I like my aperture at f4, for example. So I'll try to see if I can stay there, whether it's to go up or go down with my exposure. Like I'll try to see, because my point is, like, you're right, the shutter speed, I like to go faster just because it makes like sharper footage, especially in slow motion. But there's a certain extent, obviously, like it's not necessary. So the minimum is like the double your frame rate thing. So for example, if I'm shooting at 60, usually I'll be at like 1/250. But really the minimum is 1/125. So if I am underexposed, I'll just take down the shutter speed, go towards that 1/125, so that I don't have to change my aperture, because changing my shutter speed is not going to affect the way I film. Where if I change my aperture, then, if I go higher with the f-stop, then like everything's in focus. It makes my life easier in a way, but it doesn't look as good as I want it to. If I go lower at f2.8, now I'm in a situation where like I won't, stick my focus won't be perfect as much, and it won't be as easy to focus on things like a basketball going through the basket, things like that. So yeah, it just makes my life a little bit harder, or my creativity a bit more limited. So I'd rather change the shutter speed than the aperture. And so that's what I do. So like usually I overdo the shutter speed. So if I'm underexposed, then I'll definitely come down. And if I'm overexposed, that's where, you don't want to go too high with the shutter speed. So that's where the ND filter comes in.
Yeah. My cheat is, if I'm going to adjust one of the three on the exposure triangle, I'm going to play with my shutter. If I want to keep a f2.8, say, or a 3, I'll boost my shutter a bit. I feel like that's a quick fix if I don't have an ND filter with me. But the shutter is definitely the one you can play with. But you have to be cautious too, because if you crank it too much, so say if you're outside and you don't have your ND filter, and you're at ISO 800 and you want to shoot with an open aperture and you crank it too much, your footage will look weird. It will look like something's off, So play with it properly, and you don't need to have your aperture open the whole way. The last thing, well, before we get into, obviously the big thing too is color correction. Everything has to be color corrected. But before we get into color correction, I just want to touch one more thing too. To have good footage, and a lot of people don't realize this, but we have these great cameras that have great autofocus. But do not rely solely on your autofocus. When you're filming sports, you will have to fit into manual. You will have to switch to manual focus to get the best out of your camera. Because autofocus, especially when you're shooting at an open aperture, you have people who come in and all of a sudden the little square grabs them and your focus is off and all that. So get the most out of your camera by using the manual focus also, because it will help you get a sharper image. I use auto 75% of the time. Keep auto, but you do have to know when to switch to manual, especially when you're trying to get, ISO a player, where sometimes you want someone to walk in front of them, but you don't want the auto to grab them, So you have to learn when to keep it in manual, when to keep it in auto for your focus to have great shot. And a lot of people don't do that. They just keep it in auto the whole game, and you're not going to succeed if you do that.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. There's nothing to add.
No, I was just all right. So next up is color correction, right? So what do you got to say about color correction?
Yeah, well, I think it's similar to everything else. It's just a one little extra step that can make a big difference. Because like a lot of people, like especially at the beginning, they assume that they take the footage out of the camera, they edit it, and then that's it. Like they don't really do that extra step of color correcting. And color correcting doesn't necessarily have to be crazy. Like it doesn't mean, especially if you nailed your exposure and colors in camera, it's more about just fine tuning the look, like making it, just playing with adding some contrast or removing contrast if it's in a situation where it's a bit too much. Just playing with those things like the contrast, the shadows, adding a bit of highlights if you feel like if you were like underexposed a bit, like just playing with the highlights, just making the parts of the image that should be brighter, that should look bright, sort of a bit brighter. It just separates, because what you don't want is just be like a mushy of grays. Like you want your blacks to look dark and you want your whites to look bright. So by playing with the shadows and the highlights just a little bit, it makes a big difference, and it makes everything look more like cleaner, more professional, and just look better overall. So yeah, just, and maybe pushing a bit of the saturation, especially with sports. Like everybody's wearing like a colorful uniform. So by pushing the saturation, and if you want to, be a bit more, if you want to be a bit more advanced with it, you could push the specific color of the uniform of your team. Things of that nature will just make that your footage look that much better. And that's what makes ultimately the difference between a good image and a great image. Is just like, accentuating like a certain things with whether it's the contrast, the sharpness, the colors, things like that.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. Color correction goes a long way. It just helps make your image pop a little bit more. If you get those reds to the real red of the jersey, or the blues to the blue, it definitely makes your piece stand out. And I hate to break it to you guys, like you just don't throw on that conversion LUT and you're like, all right, I'm good. No, no. The conversion LUT is just the basic. And then you gotta tweak the exposure. You gotta tweak the shadows and that. And, if you have all the other settings that we suggested, proper exposure, proper white balance, and that, it just makes that step that much easier. Before we wrap up, I do have one question though for you, E.
Yes.
Can you save noisy footage? Or how would you save noisy footage?
Well, it depends what you mean by save.
So save. So make it less grainy, less noticeable that maybe I didn't nail my settings.
Yeah, well, it depends like how badly we were, where we're starting from. But like by taking the shadows down, it's gonna hide some of that noise in the darker spots. It's definitely gonna help. It's not gonna make your entire image look clean, but it's gonna help. And you can get away with the noisy image. The brighter your image is, in terms of like if the background is like a lighter kind of, whether it's like white walls or outdoors with where the sky is making like most of the image, like things like that, you won't notice it as much because noise is usually white. So if your background is white, you can get away with a little bit more than if you're in a darker environment and there's a lot of dark spots. In the darker spots, you'll notice the noise right away. So it depends on these things. So, but and in a way, like it helps. Like if you're filming in a gym, for example, that's not properly lit, but the walls, the floor, everything is pretty light colored, then you're gonna be able to get away with a little bit more noise without really anyone noticing it. But especially if the players are white too. but yeah, so all that to say that you can get away with it to a certain extent doesn't mean it's not there. And there's also plugins that you can use to clean noise. I've never really used one, to be honest, so I'm not really an expert on that front. But playing with the shadows definitely helps. After that, yeah, plugins, things like that. But like I and even I had this conversation with a photographer, and we both agreed that like noise you can always manage in some type of way, whether it's trying to clean it, trying to hide it with like what you were saying, like overlays and things like that. Focus is the one that if something's out of focus, it's out of focus. You know what I mean? Like you're not gonna, like, yes, you can push like the contrast and things like that and create some type of focus if you missed it by that much, but you're not gonna take a fully blurry image and bring it back to life unless you go through AI and just recreate the thing, after the fact. So if you need to be, if you need to have noise in your image to allow you to, because if you're in a darker sort of environment, like the focus, your autofocus is going to struggle a lot more than if it can see everything properly. So choose your battles. Like, yeah, I'd rather have noise than have have half my shots out of focus, basically.
Yeah, because focus is very hard. Like, I remember I had to focus, shot out of focus. I had to use CapCut. I bought it and it worked okay, but it was still soft, you know. I have used denoise Neat as the software in the past. We had a subscription when I was with the Canadians, and it helped for noise and footage. But it's a paid plugin. So there are things you can do that are paid. But I mean, hopefully these tips have helped you guys, realize that it's not your camera, it's you. You're the problem
Exactly.
with your bad footage. And if all else fails, you go to Sony's Catalyst browse, as he keeps on talking about, and you look at your settings and you see what you're doing wrong. But honestly, once you learn your settings and once you get comfortable with kind of the system like we talked about last time, you'll be fine. Your footage will look a lot better because you will have way more control of your image.
Exactly.
That's it.
Yeah, you're just one setting away.
That's it. You're always just one setting away from being perfect.
Exactly.
All right. Well, that's it for this episode of Game Day Later, guys. Take care.